Bonjour à tous. Je vous laisse le temps, pour ceux qui ne sont pas francophones, de mettre les petits appareils sur la tête. Euh, et comme le disait très justement Aziza, mon seul rôle ici sera de faire en sorte que nous terminions à l'heure pour le déjeuner.
Sachant qu'on ne donne pas le déjeuner.
Euh, mais je voudrais faire un tout petit propos introductif. J'ai un réveil, et donc je mets sur 5 minutes pour le propos introductif, très rapidement. Non, je vais enlever parce qu'il y a une partie des choses qui sont les housekeeping, les sujets de... la première chose, c'est que donc nous, ministère de l'Aménagement du Territoire, de la Transition et écologique, nous sommes très heureux d'accueillir, de co-host cette session avec l'OCDE. La deuxième chose, c'est que, comme on vous l'a probablement dit, cette session est traduite simultanément en français et en anglais. Merci pour cela. Et qu'elle est enregistrée, que les personnes qui ne souhaitent pas être enregistrées, comme moi par exemple, le disent aux, aux personnes du secrétariat de manière à ce qu'on puisse s'assurer de cela. Euh, Il y aura 7 panélistes qui auront chacun 5 minutes. Merci à tous de respecter ces 5 minutes. Et moi-même, je mets mon petit réveil pour mes 5 minutes. Je pense que je vais faire un petit peu plus court que ça. Simplement pour vous dire que je suis extrêmement heureux d'accueillir cette session. D'abord parce que c'est la dernière session des Urban Days. Et je voudrais qu'on prenne juste un petit moment d'applaudissement pour l'équipe de l'OCDE qui a organisé ces Urban Days, qui ont vraiment, je crois que c'est la première fois et c'est un succès incroyable. On a eu énormément d'interventions extrêmement intéressantes. Je crois que tout le monde a pu apporter sa pierre à l'édifice. Et donc, personnellement, parce que tout à l'heure, ce sera trop tard parce que ce sera l'heure de déjeuner.
Mais on va prendre un moment pour dire merci.
D'accord, ok. Bon. La deuxième chose, c'est que je vais vous faire un aveu personnel. 100% de mon patrimoine est du patrimoine immobilier. C'est pas tout à fait vrai parce que j'ai aussi une mobilette, mais enfin, sinon, à part ça, 100% de mon patrimoine est du patrimoine immobilier. Je suis pas le seul. Hein. Je souhaite dire que je ne suis pas le seul, que au sein du patrimoine immobilier des Français, euh, surtout au sein de l'endettement des Français, 83% de l'endettement des Français, c'est des crédits immobiliers. Je ne mentionne pas le livret A qui sert à financer le logement social. Au sens large, dans le monde, euh, les actifs immobiliers, c'est 4 fois le PIB mondial. C'est évidemment la plus forte concentration d'actifs ou déconcentration d'actifs. Cet immobilier, il est exposé au risque climatique, exposé physiquement au risque climatique, je crois que tout le monde le sait. En fait, maintenant, ça commence à devenir quelque chose qui est pris en compte. Il faut savoir que pour nous, en France, par exemple, ça paraît étonnant, mais le retrait et gonflement des argiles en France, c'est, je crois, la deuxième source de sinistre. Ça veut dire que c'est un sujet vraiment très prégnant. Il est exposé au risque physique. Pour ce qui concerne les investissements immobiliers, ils sont aussi exposés à un deuxième risque qui est partiellement physique, qui est le risque des actifs échoués, c'est-à-dire d'un certain nombre d'actifs qui ne vaudront plus ce qu'ils valent aujourd'hui dans 5 ans, ou qui ne valent déjà plus aujourd'hui ce qu'ils valaient il y a 5 ans. Euh, En France, on peut prendre l'exemple de la France qui a interdit à la location les étiquettes F et G, certainement la valeur de l'immobilier des gens qui détenaient ces actifs et qui sont des gens comme vous et moi a varié significativement. Et puis, il y a le risque, en effet, de transition. C'est-à-dire que si les gouvernements veulent effectivement appliquer l'accord de Paris, on sait que l'accord de Paris ne sera pas appliqué sans l'aide du secteur du bâtiment. Il est évident que les actifs immobiliers devront participer à la mise en œuvre de l'accord de Paris parce que c'est un très gros émetteur de gaz à effet de serre et c'est un secteur aussi exposé en termes d'adaptation, comme je disais. Voilà. Alors, j'irai pas beaucoup plus loin juste pour poser le décor. on va dire un mot en conclusion de ce qu'on va faire. Mais le but de cette table ronde, c'est de parler un peu de tout ça ensemble. Et pour cela, donc, nous avons des excellents panélistes que je vais présenter les uns après les autres. Hein. Christine Lemaître, donc, est la directrice du Conseil allemand de la construction durable, DGNB, I don't know how you pronounce that, okay. Qui est une des principales organisations européennes pour la promotion de la durabilité dans l'environnement bâti. Et donc, Christine, votre dernier projet a révélé que le secteur financier joue un rôle central dans la transition de l'immobilier durable. Comment voyez-vous les banques et les investisseurs institutionnels s'adapter à la demande croissante de portefeuilles plus écologiques? Et je signale que je n'ai pas utilisé mes 5 minutes.
Sorry, yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I have a French last name, but I don't speak French good enough so I need the translation. I have to speak to you in English now. So thank you very much for the invitation. And I think the question of how do we get these two worlds together when we look at finances, the finance sector, the insurance sector, but as well the real estate sector, is something we've been discussing, I think, for many years. And I've been in my role for more than 10 years. And when I started, I heard so many times from real estate investors, if the banks would ask for it, then we would do it all. Then we would do sustainable buildings as the new normal, as we call it, and we would do more. And what we've seen now is that actually the banks are starting to ask for that. At least in Europe, the European Central Bank is putting a lot of pressure on the larger banks to report what is your contribution in terms of your products, your loans, your mortgages you have out there to reduce CO2 emissions. And this is where we see that, unfortunately, we have this big data gap where many banks, as well insurance companies, are now relying on data of the built environment, but the built environment cannot provide that kind of data because we've just been doing a very good job in kind of in that large circle of blame, shifting the responsibility around for many, many years. And we as DGNB, we have developed a certification system. And I don't want to talk about certification, but certification enables you to have data. So we have more than 11,000 projects certified. They all have done a life cycle analysis, life cycle costing. They have an inventory on what kind of materials were used. So we see that the option is there, that the market is able to provide that kind of data. And what we see on the other side is that the finance sector now is asking for this kind of data. At the same time, we see that the lobbying against moving forward is still very strong. And we now see an omnibus directive coming in Europe, trying to take bureaucracy out, I would say, out of one of the most important topics we have out there. I think there are many other topics we should talk about reducing bureaucracy, but not when it comes about climate change, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation. And this is where we have now just launched an initiative where we have 10 German banks as the first participants, but we're looking to grow, where we see that there's this data gap, but as well that knowledge gap. Where we, as a very technical organization, for us that is it's like our daily business. But then banks are all of a sudden confronted with these kind of questions, but they don't have any technical expertise. At the same time, they get offered a lot of services, a lot of data providers, a lot of tools. And then they as well, at the same time, have to look into their existing mortgages. So I think the question is not when it's about new finance so much at the moment. It is more the question, how do they get the data from the mortgages they already have out there? And what was the impact of this kind of mortgages they put out there? And this is where we see that we have as well a big challenge, I would say, in regulation, because I think the energy performance certificate is kind of like the main tool but then at the same time have the gap of the real performance of the building to what the building theoretically would be able to achieve in energy efficiency. And this is where we're partnering now with 2 universities in Germany who are doing work on the so-called performance gap. So the performance gap is if you design a new building, and I think that applies to any country, and you follow the codes and standards, you will see that the building actually needs no more energy than you were calculating in your regulation. And in new construction, we see that gap is like 30%. So the buildings are using 30% more energy than they're supposed to by calculation, and how to actually get these emissions down in operation, and how to enable banks to access data in a way that they could not just tick the box, but really can show what is the actual energy, the actual CO2 impact or CO2 reduction impact. That is what we're trying to do. And at the same time, we see that the banks are moving forward, and I think we have to get that message out there much better, because in the real estate sector, you know, it's a very intransparent sector. You always have like different actors getting different kind of advice. So to bring that message out there that actually data is relevant, that banks are asking for this kind of information and data, I think is I think maybe the key of the transformation, that we all of a sudden look at the same topics from different sectors, and that we burst that kind of expert bubble. We've been in it for so many years. When you talk about sustainability, everyone is kind of like in their bubble. And maybe as a last remark, because I think that is kind of maybe the key driver, is not so much looking for new business from the banking side, where we see there's a lot of need. We got a lot of requests for our sign up lists, which are confidential. But the other thing is that banks already starting, my time is up, starting to not accept low performance buildings anymore as a security to issue a new loan for like large housing companies or big investors. So that all of a sudden puts the focus on buildings. They're not supposed to be financed, but they need to bring up the quality of the building stock they have. Otherwise, they cannot give it as security. The banks are not accepting it anymore. So I think there's a big transformation happening, and we're very excited to hopefully support it and to burst that expert bubble. So thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Désolé pour la sonnerie, mais ils m'ont pas cru à l'OCDE quand je leur ai dit que je mettrais la sonnerie. Et je voulais leur montrer qu'on était prêt à tout. Renata Asset, vous êtes vice-présidente de... La traduction, c'est banquier sans question, mais ça, c'est l'intelligence artificielle.
Sans frontières.
C'est banquier without boundaries, c'est ça. Votre banque est une banque d'investissement, une société de gestion d'actifs et une société de conseil qui se concentre sur la création de valeur pour ses clients au bénéfice de l'environnement et de la société. Pourquoi le financement privé a-t-il eu du mal à se développer dans l'immobilier durable? Et que peut-on faire pour débloquer des investissements plus importants, bien sûr dans les pays de l'OCDE, mais aussi dans les pays qui ne font pas partie de l'OCDE? OK.
Yes, I think it works. So thank you for the question. I will also answer in English. But I think to start with is to kind of landscape of what we're talking. So for the built environment contributes about 40% of the okay. Thank you. About 40% of the carbon emissions, and at the same time, about 80% of the buildings we'll be using in 2050 already exist today. So this tells us two main things, which is one, that this sector is way too big to ignore in climate finance. And the second one is that we cannot just focus on new buildings and the greening of, well, building new green buildings, but we need to make sure that we are also greening the existing building stock. Even though we know this, it's still a very difficult space to scale private financing. And the reason for this is mainly because of how the market is structured. We see that most of the private financing today still flows into the building of new real estate and building new sustainable real estate, because this is very clear. It's easy to centralize. You can have quite good returns on this. However, where the money is also really needed is, of course, in renovations. And in renovations of existing building stock, the ownership of the buildings is usually very fragmented, which makes it much more difficult to get private financing at scale involved. Another thing in private financing in real estate is how we understand the default definition of private financing. In real estate, we usually think of consumer individual financing. So things like mortgages, home renovation loans. And these are, even when they are offered at quite attractive rates, the uptake is still not where it needs to be. So I think this gives us the insight that it's not just the access to financing that we're struggling with, it's also the the engagement of citizens and maybe the trust in citizens to take on this debt to invest in their homes. At BWB, we're trying to expand the conversation from more private finance to institutional finance. And we're doing this by working with institutional investors and institutions to try to aggregate and make projects bankable at scale. We're doing this also by leveraging municipalities, as they have a lot of access to buildings, to big blocks of buildings at the same time. They can influence citizens. And one of the ways we're trying to do this is, for example, in a program called Net Zero Cities. We are working with a municipality who is interested in putting up a fund where they will get private investors to invest in the fund partially. So it will be a blended finance fund. And citizens can reach out to the fund and get home improvement loans at attractive rates. These would be either zero interest or interest loans, depending on the income of the citizen applying. But as I said before, we also are now tackling how do we make sure it gets to the right people and people feel comfortable accessing this. I think another thing to think about is the affordability of housing. As we know, it's globally becoming a bigger issue everywhere, that affordable housing is just not accessible to most people. And with these home renovations, it's of course great, but and the home value will increase, which is in theory not a bad thing, as long as we make sure that people with lower incomes can also afford to live in sustainable homes and not have to move out because the rent has increased, for example. So this is also something I think we really need to take into account, and which just makes the problem a bit more complex again. And then to go to non-OECD countries, I think if we take that into account, it becomes even more complex and acute, all these challenges. Of course, we know that in most cases, the institutional structures are not as established, and the perceived risk from private investors is higher in non-OECD countries overall. What we think here could be really relevant, or should be really relevant, is the sorry is the involvement of development institutions giving guarantees, first capital loss. I think we've heard this already today, the options that you have. So just trying to de-risk and give private investors some kind of comfort around this. So yeah, I would say in short, I think that as long as we make sure we work together with all the right stakeholders, which I think in this room we have, it's definitely a challenge that can be overcome, but a lot of things that still need to happen, and a lot of private capital that needs to be moved in the right direction. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, c'est passionnant, et c'est passionnant de voir qu'il y a des solutions et évidemment beaucoup de questions. Les prochaines étapes seront sans doute de s'intéresser vraiment, notamment dans le domaine du logement, à ce sujet de affordable versus sustainable. On a un vrai sujet, et il faut le prendre à bras le corps, sinon on s'en sortira jamais. Mais ça n'est pas l'objet de l'intervention suivante. L'objet de l'intervention suivante, c'est d'interroger Kay Caroline Wunsch, qui travaille à Munich Re-Risk Management Partners, qui est un leader mondial de la réassurance. Alors, trop chaud, trop humide, trop dangereux, non assurable. Que faudra-t-il pour combler le déficit d'assurance dans le secteur de l'immobilier face à l'augmentation des risques?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that question. And let me start out with one statement. So there's no doubt that we are actually facing increasing climate risk. 2024 was the hottest year on record, and 2025 is just continuing this trend. And as temperatures rise, extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more intense. For example, if you think of hot air, it can hold more moisture, and in fact, it leads to heavier rainfalls. And we are not just seeing climate change, we are feeling it. Whether it's the devastating wildfires in California or the severe floodings in Spain or Dubai. And 2024 was not only the hottest year, it was also the third costliest year for the insurance industry, with payouts of 140 billion US dollars. However, that was not enough. Not enough to cover the overall losses of 320 billion US dollars of economic losses, leaving a huge gap, uncovered, uncompensated, a large insurance gap. But it's not just climate driving that risk, it's inflation, urban growth, and also the rising asset values, which are contributing to those rising losses. And with that, also insurance premiums go up. And this raises an important question. Are we heading towards an uninsurable world? And for now, insurance is still available. It's affordability, which is one of the important topics, as well as insurance uptake, mainly due to a lack of awareness. Affordability and awareness are two important factors driving the insurance gap. And let me give you an example. Hurricane Helene struck Florida in late 2024. It brought catastrophic floodings and severe storm surges, causing 65 billion of losses, but only 16 of them were insured. And that's an insurance gap of more than 70%. While many homes were covered for wind damage, because it's standard in most of the insurance policies there, flood was underinsured. And that was mainly due to the lack of awareness, that it's separate coverage is required, and also the awareness that there was even a risk. And that played a key role while there was no coverage. Globally, the insurance gap differs a lot. So in emerging countries, we see an insurance gap of around 90%, while in OECD countries, there's an insurance gap of around 60%. But still, it remains significant, especially for underinsured periods like flooding. This shows that even in well-developed markets, communities and real estate stay vulnerable. So how do we close this insurance gap, especially in real estate, where we are facing rising asset values and rising climate risk? I believe closing the insurance gap will require multi-stakeholder effort. And let me outline three main levers. Firstly, we need to reduce vulnerability before disasters hit. And by this, I mean we need to invest in risk mitigation and climate adaptation measures, from stronger infrastructure and building codes to smarter land use and also smarter early warning systems. And that's really a joint effort. So communities play a crucial role here, like investing in shared flood defenses rather than leaving every property owner on their own. Banks are key to finance these efforts, supporting resilience while at the same time de-risking their own balance sheets. And insurers, in the end, they need to reflect the increased resilience in their pricing, making coverage more affordable. Secondly, public-private sectors must work closer together to pool risk, share expertise, and develop affordable insurance solutions. One example here is Flood Re in the UK. It's a public-private partnership which helps households in high-risk areas to afford flood insurance. So public-private partnerships are essential to expand insurance coverage. And thirdly, we must raise awareness. Many people still don't know that they're exposed or what kind of protection they need. Raising awareness about climate risk and insurance solutions is the first step to proactive risk management. The more people know about their risk, the better protected they will be. And we in Munich Re work closely together with communities and real estate, supporting them to understand, measure, and manage the climate risk. With our location risk intelligence solution, we provide climate risk data to identify and quantify climate risk, while at the same time we support with our innovative insurance solutions to manage and transfer those risks. And we are committed to being a strong partner in closing the insurance gap. Now, let me conclude. I know time is up, but I wrap it up quickly. So we see that climate change is no longer just a physical risk, it's more a financial and systemic one. And we are seeing that with rising losses, and yet large share of the losses remain uninsured. Bridging the insurance gap isn't optional, it's essential. It protects people, stabilizes economies, and builds resilience. To get there, we must act on the 3 key points: invest in resilience, foster public-private partnerships, and raise awareness. But above all, we need to act together. So let's work across sectors and across borders to bridge the insurance gap and make resilience a shared responsibility. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. On est désespéré d'avoir ce timing. Personnellement, je préférais ne pas déjeuner et continuer d'écouter les interventions. Elles sont toutes passionnantes et il y en a encore d'autres à venir. Donc, je ne sais pas comment faire. Mais non, parce que franchement, c'est extraordinaire. C'est la richesse de ce qui se dit autour de cette table. Voilà. Bon, mais après, Aziza, bon. OK.
On a 2 heures cet après-midi.
C'est vrai. On a 2 heures cet après-midi. OK. Pierre-Antoine Noug, donc, qui est lead consultant à AXA. On connaît AXA qui est à la pointe de l'intégration des sujets climatiques dans les modèles financiers d'assurance. Dans le secteur de l'immobilier, AXA Climate innove en proposant de nouveaux mécanismes d'assurance qui favorisent la résilience et la durabilité. Alors que les risques liés au climat s'intensifient, les modèles d'assurance traditionnels sont mis à l'épreuve. Avec l'intensification du changement climatique, certaines zones deviennent quasiment inassurables. Comment voyez-vous le secteur de l'assurance s'adapter à cette nouvelle réalité?
Merci pour la question. De mon côté, donc, je vais passer en français. Donc, je vais commencer par une question rhétorique. C'est déjà qui n'a jamais voulu voir sa prime d'assurance baisser? À peu près personne. Et je vais vous partager en fait l'histoire de Linkrit. Donc, en fait, c'est une société d'investissement immobilier basée à Hong Kong. Et en 2024, au sein d'AXA Climate, on a justement effectué une analyse des risques physiques climatiques après qu'ils aient ils ont eu des dégâts matériels suite à une tempête. Et après cette caractérisation du risque, on a justement collaboré avec des équipes d'AXA en local à Hong Kong, ainsi qu'avec le courtier Marsh, pour justement co-construire ce qu'on peut appeler un Sustainability Linked Insurance, en fait, dans le cadre de la souscription de leur bien immobilier. Et en parallèle de ce cadre, ce qu'on a fait, en fait, il y a une mise en œuvre justement de mesures de résilience face aux risques climatiques par Linkrit, donc via notamment l'investissement dans des mesures de protection contre l'inondation, avec des capteurs sur les différents sites immobiliers, ou encore même la mise en place d'un plan de gestion de crise, car l'adaptation, c'est aussi avant tout une question de culture du risque. Et au bout du compte, suite à la mise en place de ce cadre, Linkrit a enregistré une réduction de 12%, d'environ 12% de sa prime d'assurance lors de son renouvellement avec un contrat de 2 ans. Alors évidemment, la résilience climatique, c'est pas le seul facteur qui va expliquer cette réduction, mais par rapport au reste du secteur, on est quand même sur un ordre de grandeur avec une réduction 3 fois plus importante qu'on a pu voir suite à la mise en place de ces mesures de résilience. Et cette histoire, ça fait déjà écho donc avec ce qu'on a pu, avec les interventions précédentes qu'on a pu avoir. Et on voit bien aujourd'hui le problème économique qu'on a pour le secteur immobilier face à ces risques climatiques. Et on constate en fait que le coût d'inaction face au réchauffement climatique, il devient faramineux et aujourd'hui, il est nettement supérieur au coût de l'adaptation. Et donc aujourd'hui, il y a clairement une problématique qui se dégage et on peut se demander comment faire pour que justement, comme Linkrit, on puisse co-développer des stratégies de résilience entre les différents acteurs. Slide suivante. Et c'est à ce moment-là, en fait, que l'assureur fait surface. Ah, merci. Car le risque climatique peut et doit justement rester assurable avec un modèle qui évolue. Et je vais commencer, je vais citer un rapport du Boston Consulting Group, donc le BCG qu'on connaît tous très bien, qui stipule que les financiers et assureurs sont aujourd'hui les acteurs les plus matures pour quantifier et qualifier l'impact économique des risques climatiques et ils ont intérêt à partager leurs connaissances avec leur portefeuille de clients. Donc, j'imagine que ça doit vous rappeler justement l'histoire que je viens de raconter sur Linkrit. Et aujourd'hui, on voit que le rôle de l'assurance vis-à-vis du risque climatique s'articule autour de 3 piliers. Donc, voilà, vous êtes, je pense, déjà assez familier avec ces piliers par rapport à la présentation précédente. Et le premier pilier, c'est la prévention. Donc, on peut faire un parallèle avec la sécurité routière. On sait tous très bien le rôle qu'a pu jouer la prévention dans la réduction justement d'accidents de la route. Et la prévention pour les risques climatiques, elle est aussi primordiale. Et aujourd'hui, si je vous partage un chiffre qu'on doit retenir, c'est que chaque euro dépensé en prévention en termes d'investissement permet d'éviter 3 euros de dommages. Donc c'est un investissement qui est, disons, peut paraître assez évident. Donc la source, c'est la Caisse centrale de réassurance. Et ça implique vraiment cette évolution du rôle de l'assureur à ce sujet. Et au sein d'AXA et d'AXA Climate, on a justement engagé cette transformation, c'est-à-dire qu'on a bougé d'une activité uniquement d'assurance paramétrique vers des activités aussi liées à la prévention depuis 2021. C'est-à-dire avec d'une part toute une partie de formation qu'on appelle la Climate School, avec plus de 250 entreprises, disons aujourd'hui atteintes avec ces modules de formation. Et on a aussi justement sur cette partie prévention un accompagnement aux entreprises pour la caractérisation de leurs risques liés au climat, pour leur stratégie de plan d'adaptation et aussi la mise en place de ces différents plans d'adaptation. Donc ça concerne aujourd'hui plus de la moitié des entreprises du CAC 40 qu'on peut accompagner sur ces sujets-là. Et au niveau étatique, on accompagne notamment aussi le ministère des Armées sur la partie liée aux infrastructures. Et donc ça, c'est vraiment le premier pilier vraiment sur cette prévention qui est primordiale. Ça fait le lien aussi, cette caractérisation des risques, avec le deuxième pilier qui va être lié à la tarification juste qu'on va vouloir pour les différents risques climatiques. C'est-à-dire, demain, c'est une tarification, même dès aujourd'hui, qui va prendre en compte les spécificités locales et qui va encourager les mesures de résilience, comme a pu le mettre en place Linkrit. Et à grande échelle, en fait, cette tarification va reposer aussi sur une mutualisation des risques plus globale, nécessitant cette collaboration entre les acteurs du secteur public et du secteur privé, qui est justement crucial pour faire face à ces risques climatiques. Et le leadership du secteur public à ce niveau-là est essentiel, non seulement en tant que régulateur et financier, mais aussi en tant que catalyseur des capitaux privés. Donc on parle de financement mixte ou de blended finance, justement pour mettre en place ce type de mesures. C'est aussi le cas au niveau de l'assurance, où ces partenariats sont clés. On peut prendre l'existence du régime catastrophe naturelle en France, le régime CatNat, qui vise à protéger les Français contre les catastrophes naturelles et détenu à 100% par l'État. Et en conclusion, aujourd'hui, on peut voir que ce risque climatique peut et doit rester assurable avec ce modèle qui évolue. Et la bonne nouvelle, c'est que les leviers d'action sont quand même nombreux. On peut les réunir quand même dans 2 catégories principales. Donc, la prévention dont on discutait et aussi cet engagement des parties prenantes. Ces leviers devant être menés de concert et on a tous un rôle à jouer autour de cette table.
Merci beaucoup. Ce qui devrait nous guider, c'est un seul indicateur en réalité, c'est la proportion de bâtiments adaptés au climat dans lesquels on investit par rapport aux investissements faits dans des bâtiments qui sont toujours pas adaptés au climat. On continue aujourd'hui, alors bien sûr qu'on est très heureux d'avoir des green bonds, des green investments et des choses comme ça, mais ce qui est tout à fait particulier, c'est de se rendre compte que la masse d'investissement aujourd'hui continue d'être investie dans des ready to retrofit buildings ou dans des zones qui sont simplement pas adaptées. C'est le seul indicateur dont à l'aune duquel on devrait évaluer notre action collective. Bon, essayons d'y travailler. Olivier Marchand, responsable mondial de la recherche sur le climat à MSCI. Grâce à sa division recherche sur le climat, votre entreprise aide les investisseurs à comprendre les impacts financiers du changement climatique en offrant des outils basés sur les données pour mesurer l'exposition aux risques physiques et de transition dans les portefeuilles immobiliers. Compte tenu de votre expérience, comment avez-vous vu évoluer les méthodologies d'évaluation des risques financiers liés au climat dans la dernière décennie? Et quelles avancées prévoyez-vous dans un avenir proche?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. MSCI is honored to contribute to these OECD Urban Days. MSCI is not widely known as a climate company. I'm sure even if your personal asset portfolio mostly has real estate in it, that you have over the last few days kind of watched the volatility of the stock market. And that's the business, that's our main business. You probably know the S&P 500, and institutional investors mostly look at what is called the MSCI World. So we're in the business of index business. Now, in order to build indices today, you need a lot of data. And so we have a strong history of about 15 years in building sustainability and climate data. And as part of that, we also do a lot of analysis on real estate. So we have over 100 real estate clients that run their real estate portfolios through our analytics systems. And we have probably run around 5 million assets through that system. Now, first of all, what do these systems actually do and how have they evolved over the past 10 years? It's usually not only for a data provider like ours, but in general in the financial industry, I think always kind of the same succession. It starts with exposure data, mostly locations, emissions, and things like that. Unfortunately, we need to usually augment this data with a lot of modeled data, and that modeled data would, for example, be estimated emissions or proxies, things like that. Then, there's usually kind of an exposure kind of layer on top of that, which would mean, how exposed is a real estate portfolio to things like heat or flooding. And then in a very last step, investors today prefer quite advanced metrics and analytics. I want to highlight two flagship metrics at MSCI. One is called implied temperature rise. It's actually a metric that has been proposed by the, I guess, highest or international organization called GFENS, the the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. ITR is implied temperature rise. It's called an alignment metric. And what it measures is how aligned a certain investment is with future climate scenarios in degrees Celsius. So you can actually look at whether an investment is 1.5 or 2 degree compatible. For example, for real estate, we see that the average ITR is 2.5 degrees. Across the whole millions of assets portfolio that we have. Another metric that's an impact metric. Another important dimension always is risk. For risk, we have developed a system called climate value at risk. Climate value at risk measures so-called transition risks and physical risks, and that is measured in percentage value loss, potential drawdown, and we see an average of 5 to 6% climate value at risk across real estate portfolios. But the differences are quite stark. You have some sectors and regions, for example, transition risk for Poland can go up to 40%. So some of these climate value at risk numbers are really, really high. And our data is being used by investors for various purposes. One of them is alignment and looking at portfolios and how sustainable they are, but also for risk management, for regulatory reporting. And let me get to the main trends over the last 10 years that I've seen since I've been in this business. So first of all, a positive. I think we've seen an enormous maturity and awareness increase in the financial industry. 10 years ago, when we went to clients and explained to them, why they should look at climate risks, some of them were really puzzled, maybe even 2 years ago, but this has drastically changed. It's clear to everyone in the financial industry, there's not a single organization that doesn't look at climate change. So that's a really positive. Also, the data situation has really improved, and the reporting requirements have really helped. The number of regulations has really increased, and people have talked about the omnibus. The tracking the number of regulations that investors today have to follow has almost become a full-time job, and is really complicated. And our real estate investors, I think, are integrating our data more and more in the due diligence process. We've talked about banks earlier. So yeah, I think those are the major trends that we've seen so far. I could talk much longer, like all of us. Happy to yield back.
Incroyable la fiabilité de ces intervenants. Merci, merci beaucoup. Alors, Zoé Duval, vous êtes consultante principale à Mott MacDonald. Vous avez travaillé en étroite collaboration avec des investisseurs et des institutions internationales. Comment des méthodologies telles que PICRAM peuvent-elles soutenir l'alignement sur des cadres tels que, par exemple, le CSRD ou la taxonomie de l'Union européenne? Selon vous, où en est le secteur de l'immobilier dans l'intégration du risque climatique physique dans les stratégies d'investissement? Et quelles sont les lacunes les plus importantes qui subsistent?
Is that better? Thrilled to bring to life this practical solution to really support a lot of what the themes we're talking about today, the real estate and infrastructure to consider and act on the increasing physical impacts of climate change. So I want to begin by setting out the global context to echo brilliant colleagues who have already labored this point, but the adaptation finance gap is significant and widening, and it's increasing year on year, leaving our communities, our real estate, our infrastructure and economic systems vulnerable to climate change. But finance flows aren't being directed to resilience, and why is that the case? Well, we understand that historically there's been poor benefits articulation, leaving financial participants without that degree of certainty they need to realize the benefits from resilient investment. So that's where a UN-backed initiative was launched at COP26 to tackle this issue. And it brought together an impressive list of members, actors from governments, international organizations, climate science, academia, financiers, engineering partners like ourselves, really charged around this thesis that actually investing in resilience isn't more costly, but a reliable source of future cash flows. There are many members represented here today, and I'm thrilled to say that we've been applying the method globally since then. So after months of development led by Mott MacDonald and the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investor and its members, we launched the methodology pro bono for public good because we saw the need. And this was to support asset owners, operators and investors invest more strategically in climate resilience. Importantly, it's stakeholder-led. It's a 4-step gated process. And in simple terms, it assesses and quantifies physical climate risks, designs resilience options, and integrates them into financial analysis. It can be sufficiently flexible in order to meet different taxonomies and different drivers, but it was the first of its kind. And you may be wondering, why is it different to other methodologies that are now out there? Well, it's not just a risk assessment. It's a multidisciplinary quantified appraisal method that brings together that best practice to actually design and cost those options. So another aspect that makes it unique is that collaboration, and that unrivaled scrutiny and validation provides a common language and standard for the industry to integrate physical climate risk into investment decision-making. And so that sets out the stall. And now to answer the questions on application. So we've been applying this on a number of assets globally, and we're more recently applying it in the real estate. And historically, there hasn't been the business case for integrating physical climate risks. But now that we can quantify the impact of doing nothing and model options, we can more easily redirect those investments. So in terms of the frameworks that you mentioned, they provide a top-down view of how to integrate climate change at an organizational level. That's been a great catalyst, but this provides the how. So an example I could give is we were working with a global equity investor who were attempting to apply PCRAM at the portfolio. So we, based on their need to drive TCFD, we looked across hundreds of the assets in their portfolio to really understand where those risk hotspots were, and then we could engage more broadly to look at those hotspots and do a more detailed assessment into the physical climate risks. You asked how far the real estate sector is embedding physical climate risks. Well, from the lens of applying this in the infrastructure context and more recently in real estate, I would say there's pockets of good practice, but understandably, real estate is behind infrastructure. And I think that's due to three reasons. One, there hasn't been the evidence, there hasn't been the business case, which is what PCRAM seeks to serve, to really provide that practical economic business case. Collaboration has been historically lacking, despite real estate participants being willing to collaborate. There haven't been the incentive structures for collaboration, and it hasn't been clear. So many in the room have contributed and want to participate in this, and PCRAM can provide that platform for collaboration by being that industry benchmark and standard. And finally, systems aren't historically understood. The real estate is a really key part of our systems. And as my colleague mentioned, it's too large to ignore. And if we ignore the supporting infrastructure that real estate relies on, we won't be able to keep the lights on, and the stakes will be significant if it goes wrong. So despite that limited understanding, the system and how the system interplays, it relates to critical points of failure, which, if not understood, could really lead to business risk. So PCRAM seeks to solve that by providing industry methodology that speaks a common language across those respective areas. It's a practical solution that integrates physical climate risks into investment decisions, and it provides that investor confidence to make a real tangible impact. Thank you.
Pierre Evra. Donc, vous êtes directeur exécutif de Synergiec, qui est le premier intermédiaire en opération de banque et en service de paiement dans le secteur de la rénovation énergétique. De nombreux propriétaires hésitent à investir dans des travaux de rénovation malgré les bénéfices de long terme. Quelles sont les stratégies les plus efficaces pour convaincre les clients de passer à l'action? Comment les incitations financières telles que les subventions publiques ou les avantages fiscaux se comparent-elles aux pressions exercées par le marché pour favoriser l'adaptation?
Bonjour et grand merci de ces questions. Je vais essayer de rester dans le temps imparti. Investir dans la rénovation énergétique, qui dit investir dans la rénovation énergétique, calculer un temps de retour sur investissement, qui majoritairement, évidemment, était calculé sur la base du montant des travaux divisé par les économies d'énergie potentielles générées sur une durée donnée. Très rapidement, ça marche très très bien pour des petites installations, des petits systèmes. Dès qu'on rentre dans une rénovation beaucoup plus globale, d'ampleur, on se rend compte que c'est intenable économiquement. Mais après, on se dit, quand on est sur une rénovation globale, ce n'est pas qu'une rénovation énergétique. On met à jour totalement le patrimoine. Il se passe quelque chose. On améliore la qualité de service du bien immobilier dans son marché. Et quelque part, ça, évidemment, ça a un prix. Et ce n'était pas pris en compte, je dirais, dans les calculs. Donc, quelque part, il y avait ce fameux biais. Alors maintenant, quelle stratégie? Vous allez comprendre tout de suite quelle est la stratégie pour mieux pousser nos clients à rénover. Finalement, elle est très, très simple. C'est de prendre en compte ces écarts de valeur vénale pour la prise de décision. Alors, il se trouve qu'en France, depuis 2014, les notaires observaient ce qu'il se passait sur la fameuse valeur verte du bien. En France, on a eu une accélération à partir de 2021 avec la loi climat et résilience. On en parlait justement, un nouvel outil, le diagnostic de performance énergétique, mais surtout des contraintes. Et quelque part, depuis 2021, nous avons enfin des tendances fermes, précises sur ce qu'il se passe, peut-être moins sur la valeur verte, mais surtout ce que nous appelons la décote brune. Ça veut dire qu'à l'heure actuelle, un bien qui est mal classé perd de la valeur chaque année, 3%, 4%, par an. Ce qui fait que les clients, pour nous, pour les inciter, c'est leur dire concrètement, quand vous allez rénover, après avoir fait le montage financier, en réduisant le reste à charge, en utilisant tous les produits bancaires, c'est de dire, juste après la rénovation énergétique, votre bien va valoir ça, un petit plus, malheureusement à l'heure actuelle. Par contre, si vous ne faites rien, dans les 3 ans, vous avez entre 7 et 10% de perte de la valeur de votre bien sur du résidentiel. Et je ne parle que du résidentiel collectif parce que les données sont encore plus dures et beaucoup plus violentes sur de la maison individuelle. Je donne un chiffre. Sur une grande région comme l'Aquitaine, c'est moins 25% quand un bien est classé F et G par rapport à un bien qui est classé D. Donc ça, vraiment, c'est un élément que nous utilisons à l'heure actuelle et qui marche très, très bien. Donc sur les aides, quelque part, les aides et les subventions ont été excellemment pertinentes pour accompagner et continuent d'accompagner une majorité de personnes, mais qu'on se dise les choses, à l'heure actuelle, c'est le marché qui fait sa loi. Les Français ont bien intégré cette notation un peu avant tout le monde, avant même les professionnels. Voilà, pour l'équilibre, à l'heure actuelle, le marché fait clairement sa loi, mais cependant, il faut conserver ces systèmes d'aide qui vont accompagner peut-être en effet les plus faibles, mais aussi qui vont permettre de développer d'autres systèmes, d'autres techniques. Et je pense notamment, par exemple, à la ville de Paris, qui a mis des aides sur la résilience, comment on fait pour un bâtiment, au-delà de la performance énergétique, pour avoir un îlot de fraîcheur au sein du bâtiment. Merci.
Je propose une minute de silence. Euh, si on imagine, c'est absurde hein, comme calcul économique, on est d'accord, hein, mais si on imagine que les bâtiments existants, qu'il faut faire 10% de travaux de la valeur des bâtiments existants dans tous les bâtiments existants du monde, c'est absurde et en même temps, c'est pas si absurde comme ordre de grandeur pour s'adapter au changement climatique ou pour prévoir les effets Ben, si l'immobilier, c'est 50% de la richesse mondiale, on fait varier de 5% la richesse mondiale. C'est idiot hein, comme calcul. Mais enfin, comment est-ce que le secteur économique et financier est préparé à ces changements? Best case, tout va bien, tout le monde a bien prévu le truc. Worst case, on ne sait pas ce que c'est la crise de 2008 par rapport à ce qui éventuellement arrive. Bon, je reviendrai là-dessus en conclusion en 2 mots, mais j'ai utilisé votre minute. Alors, Ardian, c'est l'une des principales sociétés d'investissement privé dans le monde. Elle gère 150 milliards de dollars d'actifs. Euh, Elle s'intéresse activement, évidemment, aux risques financiers posés par les actifs échoués, c'est-à-dire les biens immobiliers qui risquent de perdre de leur valeur en raison de facteurs liés au climat ou au changement réglementaire. Antoine Batman, c'est le directeur du développement durable chez Ardian. Et donc, Antoine, compte tenu de l'accélération de la transition vers une économie à faible émission de carbone, comment abordez-vous le risque d'immobilisation des actifs? Quelle stratégie recommandez-vous pour atténuer ces risques dans les portefeuilles d'investissement?
Thank you. So I will speak in English, but I will ask some indulgence for my accent. Ardian has said we're a global asset manager managing 150 billion. We're particularly active on the real asset space, including real estate, a 5 billion portfolio, mostly in Europe, in office building. And I will talk about how we are changing our strategy, including to address trending risks, and what we call value add, meaning that we are mostly investing in a view to refurbish a building. So when we talk about trending risks, there is 2 factors. The main one is either the building is becoming uneconomical to operate because the operating expenses are too high, or because regulation must ask for a large capital investment plan that you might not be able to recover. So that's one end of the trending risks. The other end of the trending risk is no demand. Your asset is illiquid. You have no one, either lessee or investor, willing to invest. And so how we've integrated that risk in our investment processes. I won't talk about how to make a nearly zero energy building, because I mean, everyone knows how to make a nearly zero emission building. It's an engineering problem, but in practice, in many instances, you cannot push the needle that far. And so you're operating in a much more, I would say, constrained environment. And the main question is how you deal with this environment. So what we've done is first, we've integrated stranding risk in our investment processes. From the moment we identify an opportunity to the moment we sign the deal to the ownership period. So for instance, at due diligence phase, when we're looking at an asset, we'll systematically conduct or build a digital twin to understand what measure can be implemented, what are the payoff, either in terms of energy efficiency or in terms of value that we could recover through increased lease. We are also doing systematically a climate risk analysis. So we are looking at whether the building is at risk in the next 50 years, what measure is to be implemented. And the last thing that we are doing is looking at the regulatory local urban context in which the building operates and how this will increase or decrease the resilience of the building. What we can do, what we cannot do. For instance, we cannot put solar PV panel everywhere, even if from a climate perspective, it would make sense to understand the constraints that we're operating in. I think one strong message is when you look at the cost of doing all those analysis, when you look at the overall transaction cost, it's limited. I'm not saying to our partners that they could be more expensive, but I think that it's good money invested. The second point is transforming and making our strategy evolve. So because it's an office building today, it doesn't need to be an office building tomorrow. And for instance, repurposing is very important. We've looked recently at an old office building in a city center. We could not make the economic work, but if it become a data center with its waste heat recovery, it sits in a different ecosystem and it makes sense. So repurposing. And the last bit is developing new asset class. For instance, we've recently launched a student housing fund. What we see is that individual student housing are particularly inefficient from an environmental perspective. And there is a lack for common, affordable student housing. So if we develop nearly zero emission student housing, then from a climate perspective, it makes sense. We address trending risks and we create an attractive asset class. So that's in practice how it's integrated in our investment process. The other important part is how do you create demand for green, resilient real estate. And so you need to work both with your lessee to demonstrate that it makes sense from a rent perspective. It will be more expensive, but they will likely recover the cost. And the building is usually much more efficient, much more attractive to live in. And the good point is that as an investor, you can capitalize the rent. And so you increase the value of the asset. So demonstrating that it makes sense for them is one bit. But I think the second and perhaps more important bit is how do you create a desirable asset class, which is sustainable and resilient real estate? And how do you work with your investors to demonstrate that today it makes more sense to invest in value-add strategy, meaning refurbishment, than in what we call core plus or core to operate existing building. And so experience sharing is pretty important because usually they want, but they don't know how. And last point, I will conclude with that. It's also important to make this asset class, I would say, resilient to cycle because there is a significant need for investment in refurbishment. And we know that real estate is very volatile and could be impacted by a change in rates. And so making sure that we demonstrate that it's a risk mitigating strategy and it's resilient in the long term is very important.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Antoine. On avait prévu un moment de questions-réponses. Ce que je vous propose, c'est s'il y a des questions brûlantes et qui posez-les. On a un moment d'échange cet après-midi assez long et ceux qui veulent y participer, je invite les personnes qui veulent y participer à contacter Jisoo qui est ici avec nous pour voir la faisabilité de leur participation. Donc, s'il y a une ou deux questions brûlantes, on peut les prendre maintenant et puis ensuite, on gardera les questions pour cet après-midi. Je vois qu'il y a une question de Sciences Po. Est-ce que c'est... Oui. OK. Ouais, c'est possible. Vite fait.
Merci beaucoup, and merci OECD for organizing all this. It has been an amazing experience all these 4 days for me. I'm still a student. My name is Cornelia German, but I don't speak German. So and I'm an architect. And I just want to conclude by showing you a bit the image that I have of what happened here during these days. So while I was studying, we were working on transparent paper, if you know. I don't know what's the name in English. So all the time when we were drawing on a new paper, we had to keep the pillars and the structure of the buildings to put it on the new. What I can see from these days, because the first day we had the circular economy, the second day we had the SDGs, and now we have the finance. If I superpose all these layers, I cannot see very clear which is the structure, which are the pillars. So I think here it's important to work a bit more and define them, having a common terminology, because if you bring an architect in this room, I don't know how many architects we have here. So in real estate, architects are very important. And if you bring an architect here, it's Chinese, most of what has been spoken here today. So architects are not trained well enough in finance. They don't understand very much of this. And they are a key actor in real estate and in the entire transition, because buildings are responsible for 40% of the emissions. So what I want to say here is that I believe that architects should be more involved into this, and they should be an important stakeholder here. And yeah, I hope that at the next Urban Days, we have 40% architects in this room.
Bon, merci beaucoup. L'Union internationale des architectes est brillamment représentée par Gaëtan ici, et un certain nombre d'architectes dans la salle. On participe au débat et c'est absolument vrai. C'est une prise de conscience tardive. On y arrive. Merci de votre intervention. C'est le moment de passer la parole pour le wrap-up à Raphaël Jachny, qui est chef d'équipe finance pour l'action climatique à la direction de l'environnement de l'OCDE et qui va nous dire ce que nous avons dit d'intéressant.
Thank you very much. I do not thank my OECD colleagues for for this task. There was even one more, I think, presenter than initially planned on the agenda. So summarizing 8 fantastic 5-minute interventions is absolutely impossible. So forgive me for not doing that, but providing a few high-level reflections and trying to link back to what the 8 have said. As background, I work in the OECD Environment Directorate, where I lead a team that produces, put it that way, evidence-based assessments of whether or not finance and investments are contributing or undermining climate policy goals, both mitigation and resilience. Clearly, we've talked about both today. I think in this context, it's been made very clear already by some of the previous participants and speakers that the building sector and the real estate sector is critical. I think Renata already mentioned it's about 30-40% of greenhouse gas emissions. Kai's, I think, intervention made it very clear about physical exposure to physical risks and rising impacts and consequences in terms of insurance industry. As such, it's a sector from where we sit that should allow us to bring environmental, financial, but of course also social perspective together and those to converge. It should. In other words, contributing to climate action should be something that also allows you to decrease your exposure to climate risks, avoid costs, and protect assets and maintain living conditions. That's the theory. In practice, what we observe is that despite these convergence of interests and perspectives, it remains what we can call a hard to abate sector. sector from a mitigation perspective and a hard to make resilient sector from an adaptation perspective. And so there's been lots of mentions of great initiatives by different actors here today, and those are totally valuable, but there remains some sort of like knowledge, assessment, and decision-making gap here. So I'll provide three areas of reflections here. I think they've been mentioned, and I'll link to some of the presentations before. In terms of greenhouse gas performance and assessments, I think it's been made very clear by Christine that we cannot rely on theoretical sort of like performance such as EPC, but need to monitor the actual performance of buildings to help inform, based on usage, to help inform actual decision making. We're at the OECD. I have to speak about policymakers, relating that back to the question of how do we produce assessments that are decision useful. From a policy perspective, we really need countries to put forward credible and quantified targets and sector-specific pathways for their building sector that the private sector, that investors can use as benchmark and reference points over time in a consistent and trustable manner. That kind of links to the second area I wanted to highlight on transition plans. From the real economy and financial investor side in the building sector, we need them to design, time-bound climate transition plans and actions that are both environmentally ambitious and economically viable. Otherwise, they're just not credible. And that's what we've seen happening sometimes over the past 5-10 years with targets being set and nothing actually happening, because this was not credible either from an environmental or from an economic viability perspective. Obviously, the feasibility and the economic viability of investments, I think it's been made very clear by what what was your name? Antoine, perhaps? No, Pierre at the end, from the sort of the rationale of the economic decision making. That a lot of that will be dependent, of the economic viability will be dependent on countries' regulatory and policy environments. And there we really need more than just ambitious national targets on, where the building sector needs to be in 5, 10, or 20 years. We need incentives, we need standards. Just to give you one example from our own work in the past, we've looked at the UK building sector and investments over time, and observed that there's been lots of progress in the new built investments to make the investment more energy efficient, or the underlying assets energy efficient. But that actually, even within not even going to refurbishing, but even in new built, only 1% of investment could be considered as consistent with what the Climate Commission of the UK, independent from the government, says should happen for the country to reach its net zero objective, and for the sector to contribute to that. So there's a policy gap clearly there between even the national target and the sort of the policy environment. Third area, physical risk and climate resilience. I think here I would say that there still is a pricing sort of issue there. There's a lot of investments that do not reflect the actual risks that the buildings face now, but it's even more so in the future. There's still a lot of investments going to highly exposed assets, and I really speak from a physical exposure perspective. There are many modeling and data challenges. I won't go into the details of climate scenarios, but there's also lots of good work and initiatives, and a lot to leverage also in the geospatial data analysis space to help improve that. I think Olivier touched on that from MSCI. Let me also flag here that in our work, despite being from the environmental policy community, what we see is a very important role for the financial sector policymakers in that space, who can, through the implementation of climate-related prudential policies, push the boundaries of the financial sector and try to help a better integration of these climate-related consideration in financial decision making. For central banks in particular, I would mention also the fact that they can run themselves a lot of very interesting analysis based on data that they have access to, that other stakeholders in other policy communities don't have access to, including ourselves in the climate and environmental policy space. In closing, a few sort of like perspectives on the OECD role, I think across the board, and not just us, but also looking at my colleagues from the Center for the CFE Center. Obviously, we have a role to play, I think, as has been in the case in the past for many other issues, to contribute to strengthening the policy relevance, transparency, and integrity of frameworks that the market, the industry develops. And it's great to see that level of dynamism. I mean, very interesting to hear from MSCI. This is something that we connect in our work a lot with MSCI on the methodologies that Olivier mentioned. I was not particularly aware of what Zoe presented on the PCRAM, but this is also interesting. I think at the OECD, we have a role to play for help policymakers making sense of that, right? That's a lot of information. You need help from organizations like us to try to sort of see what are the best practices there and where perhaps we can push the needle further on transparency and integrity. Obviously, we have a role to play to assess progress at aggregate, national, and sectoral level. So in the building sector, I think there's a question of how far can we go in that space, and how can we, despite the data challenges at the OECD, be able to contribute to assessing progress to what we've been discussing today, to inform both policy making, of course, but also the investment decisions. I think that some of them, Adrien was mentioning some of the innovations that need evidence to sort of like be even better informed. In the current context, one of the last thing I would highlight is that I think it's particularly important for us to provide improved evidence and a narrative as well, that policies and actions to reduce greenhouse gas emission and increase adaptation actually go hand in hand with reducing risks, avoiding costs, and future-proofing assets. I think it's been said a few times, but I think that narrative needs to be further honed on, and even more so in the current policy environment. Also, with the idea of improving access to capital and to cheap capital. I think this is a narrative that will help us keep the ambition on the climate side as well. Very last thing. I know this is perhaps not the focus, although it's been touched upon, I think, by Kai in her answer. When we speak to climate change, we need to address the topic of international equity, and I don't mean finance here. I mean, from a human perspective. Most of our discussions here relate to advanced economies. I think, Kai, again, you've mentioned very clearly that we're talking refurbishment here a lot in advanced economies. I think when we turn to developing countries, less advanced economies, the focus remains about how to fulfill basic housing needs. And at the same time, leapfrogging towards low greenhouse gas housing and climate resilient housing in highly exposed, often, environments. That's a quite different question. I agree, but not something that you can avoid in this area. Thanks again. I hope you had set your alarm in reverse mode. We were over time to start with anyway, so the fact that I went over 5 minutes.
On m'a dit pour l'OCDE, pas de... Bon, on arrive à la fin de notre session. Je crois que c'est une session importante. Évidemment que nos réflexions ne portent pas que sur les pays de l'OCDE, mais très largement sur les pays émergents et en développement, qui sont un sujet extrêmement important. Je voudrais terminer. Je crois que ici, ce qu'on est en train de faire, c'est qu'on est en train de passer du green building, c'est-à-dire de mettre des arbres sur des balcons, de se dire comment est-ce qu'on a un sujet qui est extrêmement lourd et qui est celui de comment est-ce qu'on est tous engagés dans cette transition physiquement et financièrement. Il s'agit de nos retraites, il s'agit de l'endroit où on vit, il s'agit de ce qu'on va laisser à nos enfants, il s'agit de choses qui sont vraiment le cœur de notre vie. Donc je crois qu'il faut dire que ce qu'on est... En fait, souvent, quand on est un peu écolo, on dit, voilà, on est un peu des hippies, quoi. Hein, on est un peu des gens qui plaident pour l'environnement, hein, avec ce côté sympathique. Là, on est vraiment en train de passer dans autre chose. On est en train de se demander comment est-ce qu'on sécurise 50% de la richesse mondiale. Voilà. C'est ça le sujet qu'on a en face de nous. Comment est-ce qu'on sécurise, comment est-ce qu'on prend en compte et qu'on sécurise 50% de la richesse mondiale. Donc merci beaucoup à l'OCDE pour cette organisation absolument brillante. Je sais qu'autour de la table, chacun d'entre vous a au moins autant à apporter que ce que nous avons dit ici. Je vois les gens qui sont autour de la table et quand je regarde les petits chevalets, je vois bien que chacun a des choses à dire. Chacun pourra le dire. Ce que je souhaite, c'est que cette réunion soit un démarrage, et vraiment, et qu'elle nous permette un travail riche et je crois un peu urgent dans la perspective d'avoir des premières conclusions, ou au moins des premières orientations pour la COP 30 à Belém. Et voilà, je passe la parole à Aziza et à l'OCDE pour la suite du programme. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Pierre, Yves Laurent. Je m'embrouille dans les pierres. Thank you so much, Yves Laurent, and for the excellent seamless moderation. And this brings us to the end. It's been an incredible 4 days. I want first to thank the interpreters. Please join me for their amazing support. Mes amitiés à Olivier Péan, and for their huge flexibility over the week. You've been translating in 4 languages. This is over. You can leave now. While I thank the rest of the team, we can switch to English only, but I think you did deserve your lunch break. Please, thanks a lot for being with us. I would like, of course, to thank all the participants. I would like to thank all the speakers, all the OECD colleagues that have been involved in these urban days. When we started thinking about this idea over 3 years ago, we had no clue we could get to this stage. It's been really rewarding for all of us. And as you can see in this slide, it's not completely over because we have side meetings in the afternoon. If you're interested in attending some of them do reach out. They start at 2:30. I would like to thank all the supporting institutions that have been instrumental in organizing the Urban Days overall. And in particular, sorry, this is going too fast. Yes, here we go. 35 organizations that have joined forces, that have brought their constituencies, that have co-convened the sessions. And in particular, I would like to single out these 3 that have been instrumental to ensure not only the media coverage of the event, News Tank Cities, and many thanks to Sacha and to Errol and to all those that have been interviewing people around and capturing the video. Many thanks to Adrien, who is the most important person in this room because he's going to take the family picture now and he has to leave at 1:30. So we have to make sure he gets a chance to take this final moment of all of us. And big thanks to Sciences Po and Léonard de Vinci because they've been, Radzi and Thomas, so instrumental in shaping the youth moments in addition to mobilizing the different partners around the table. So thank you all. I would also like just to give you a few metrics of this week. I'm not going through that, you know all of this, but one thing that I would like to also flag is that we have tried to make this user-friendly, and there is a guy sitting there that nobody has seen over the week and who was instrumental in drawing really this user-friendly capture of the event. So big thanks to Tish as well, please. And we'll make sure we disseminate this very broadly and globally. There is, of course, my team, and 3 of them in particular, they have gone through really bumpy moments over the past few weeks. So Anna, Mana, and Nanami, please stand up so we see you. You've been really instrumental in making this work. Anna literally joined as my office coordinator 6 weeks ago, so you can imagine how she's already embraced all that. Mana is just back from maternity leave, and Nanami has been really amazing, absorbing all the workload. It was fantastic, and we owe you a lot for this first edition. Thank you very much. Thanks to Sujin, my partner, for shaping this all. She's been liaising with each and every person around this table and making this very smooth. I would like to thank also my colleagues Dorothée and her entire team for shaping the financing session, Rudiger and his entire team for shaping the SDG session, many colleagues in the director's office under Lamia's leadership for the trust and for the support and for really the enthusiasm, Lamia, Nadim, our directors and deputy directors, but also Andy, the counselor, Lawrence, and all the assistant team, Nicolas, Lucy, and Frédéric. Thank you all. Really, we owe you a lot as well. I do want to have a word for the communication team that has been instrumental, led by Shane. I don't know where Shane is. Big thanks. And I see Pauline, I see Alix, Finn, and Jack. 15 reports were launched this week. It's a lot of work to get the reports out. So big thanks to all of you and Isabel as well. And of course, the city team that has delivered the content for this work. So please join me in thanking the Champion Mayors team led by Camille that organized the Champion Mayors meeting. And in her team, all the colleagues that were in charge and that were really instrumental for the sessions, Andrew, Elizabeth, Thomas, but also a few others, Laurence in particular, to organize the Champion Mayors meeting and all the work behind the Cities for All Ages report. I'd like to thank the circular economy team and the buildings and the water team as well. Please join me, Oriana, Cairo, Jisoo, but also Juliette, Ender, Maria, Dorothea, Sho, and Takeshi, who is back to Japan, but still with us. We owe Takeshi a lot for the sustainable buildings work. And of course, Kon, Gunesh, and Robin for the amazing work. Let me also now thank the team that organized the SDGs Day. Stefano, please, and his team, Oscar, Lawrence, Marcus, and many others. And as I said, Rudiger's team with Anna and Claudia as well, that mobilized the statisticians for the conversation on the SDGs. And today in particular, we launched, in addition, before today, we launched a few climate reports. So Tadashi and all the team in Tadashi's unit, Eleanor, but also Celia, David, Marie, and Sho. Thank you all. These first applications of Dakar are amazing and really the beginning of something. I'm sure there will be huge going forward. And to the financing conversation today, congratulations to all the city-to-city partnership team and our colleagues in the World Observatory of Subnational Finance for the great work. Thank you so much. It's been huge. We had master classes that were amazing. Just to tell you that everything that has been recorded will be put in the public domain over the coming days. Give us a little break. We need to recover our breath, but I promise by the end of April, this will be available. We have a photo gallery also. We have daily digest. If you've not seen that, they're available on the very same website of the Urban Days. We have a special newsletter and a lot more coming. And there were 5 staff that just joined the division this week. Emily, Luca, I think we have Carolina, Alex, and Alicia. There's no best training than just starting with the Urban Days. So welcome to the city team. Thank you all so much. It's been really an honor and a privilege. And thanks for your generosity. And over to Lamia for the next steps.
So you would have understood that Aziza has mobilized all the team of in CFE. And of course, this was a wonderful experience. It was a pilot, actually. The idea is to now move next year with, a larger event where we will also bring other constituency in rural areas as well, also the local economic actors. So in the beginning, when she came with this idea, just ahead of, we have a very important moment, the Regional Development Policy Committee Ministerial meeting, everybody said, no, not now. It's not possible. And she said she was really insisting. And I think it was a wonderful idea because now we are in a moment where we know that, it's very difficult. The multilateral system is being shaken by a lot of changes. But here, when listening to you, this is where things happen. And this is where we can keep the momentum to advance all the global agenda, to keep contact and make sure that we stay the course. So my first thank goes to all of you presented here, but all the partners, the institution, the experts, everybody who participated to that. I was myself very struck by the quality of the intervention. It's not just about gathering people. It's about gathering good quality people. Different constituency, we have politicians, we have experts, we have people representing the private sector. Everybody brought their knowledge, their passion for the subject. So I would like really to pay a tribute to that. We need to continue together. You are part of the OECD family now. She's going to send you a lot of emails. And one thing that she's going to do, she's going to circulate to you what we call the call to action. We have an outcome document that was first produced by the OECD champion mayors, the coalition of these 80 mayors from around the world. That is a message that we're going to transmit to the minister in Warsaw next month. And if you are interested, if your institution is interested to add its signature, you are very much welcome. I would like also to flag that, you know, we are the OECD, so it's a multi-sectoral organization. We have been working a lot on cities, on urban development, but over the years, we have made the case that when we work on cities, with cities, it's not just something that matters for urban development policymaker. It's something that should be mainstream to all ministries, finance, economy, environment. We have seen that with the representative of the Environment Directorate. It's really something that should mainstream everywhere. And one good thing out of this week is that we are more and more engaging the ambassadors, which represent, you know, the Council of the OECD, which is the highest body, because progressively we are trying to make sure that we bring the voice of cities and regions in the OECD policy making. So, and tomorrow we are going with my deputy. He's not here, but I think you saw him many times. Nadim, together we're going to report to the Secretary General about the importance. He couldn't join us, but he's very much looking forward to hearing about that. I want to say that I've been working the OECD for many, many years. I don't want to tell you the numbers, otherwise I will look very old. But what was really fun for me is to see again some people that I knew from the past or from recent past. And it's pretty cool just today to see Keith Thorpe, a former member of the OECD Working Party on Urban Areas. There was Professor Le Gallès with us. Yves-Laurent Sapoval is one of the oldest friends here. And of course, Mark and Eugenie, who came from United States. I told them just now, you know, we are so happy to see the Americans. Please stay with us. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity. And of course, my last word goes to Aziza, who orchestrated all of that. So please join me to give her a round of applause, because she's the big chef of this. And now we go for the photo, because I think the guy is going to leave. We need to catch him up. Thank you so much.
In the middle. Everybody, all the warriors in the middle, all participants, the staff, the team, here with the banner on our back. And Adrien,